I am thrilled to have Bonnie here. Welcome to Life After Corporate, Bonnie.
Thanks for having me, Deb. It's great to be here.
It's so great to have this conversation. Before we hit record, Bonnie and I were talking about when we met about 10 years ago. We met through a mutual friend, Julie Catino. Julie is still my BFF branding buddy, and I haven't talked to her in a while, but I'll probably give her a call after this since we've just had this conversation. And way back 10 years ago, can I tell the story?
Yes?
So Bonnie and I were both single after a divorce, and we were both dating, and we kind of bonded over that mutual experience with which, if you're a woman in midlife and you're dating, you can kind of feel our pain and our joy at the same time. So it's great to have you back and welcome you to Life After Corporate for a different type of conversation.
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to be telling a different story than that of a early dating divorcee.
So let's talk about your venture into corporate. So into entrepreneurship. So you started as a journalist.
Yes.
Let's hear how you launched Company B and what it sustained you for the last 15 years. I mean, that's
Oh,
quite an accomplishment.
oh, thanks. That's a really great question. So I was a journalist writing mostly for the New York Times. I was covering technology and health. So was really good at translating complicated things into making them simple and plain. Um, and I had this opportunity along the way to do a consulting project for a PR agency. And I wound up staying for 4 years, a mid-sized PR agency. As the creative director and running the largest account of the agency, which was eBay. And then I acquired additional duties like becoming head of the brand for the agency. And so and I started the first social media practice of the agency because at the time I saw that there was a sea change coming, and we as communicators needed to learn, adapt, adjust, and tell stories in this new media, which was social media. So I left in 2008 because I was wearing so many hats and working for someone else. And I thought, I'm going to bring what I've learned into my own agency, Company B. And I started Company B with a focus on working with tech clients so I could continue to translate the confusing life that we were all experiencing back then. Um, and I knew that one of the uh, reasons why my clients work with me and then my new clients started to work with me was because they needed stories to be told. So very, very quickly, when I created my company, Company B, I I created us as storytellers for brands, and that's sort of been our call to action. I found that clients really responded to this feature, and we've been doing it ever since.
Wow, that's impressive. And starting a business in 2008, which was, if some of our listeners have shorter memories or they're too young to know, we're in the early stages of a recession, which
Yes.
carried through to 2009, 2010. So you launched a business in the middle of a recession. That is so fascinating. So interested to hear what were some of the challenges that you had to overcome and how have you navigated this wild, woolly world of entrepreneurship to survive for 15 years?
Yes, so that's a really great question. One of the things that I knew early on was that I learned when try pitching stories as a journalist, pitching screenplays as a screenwriter, is that people who you've met along the way, even if you've stayed out of touch with them, will, if you made a good impression, they're not going to forget you. So I started with people reaching out to people with whom I'd worked over the course of my career as a freelancer, and sharing with them the fact that I had this offering. And once some of my former people understood that I knew how to tell stories in this brave new world of social media, I was off to the races. My first set of clients were old friends and old clients who had already had some experience with me and trusted me to get them to the next level. Another thing that I also did in 2008, which was unusual, was I set my company up as a virtual company. Um, I was lucky enough to do some consulting for a PR agency that specialized in providing PR services for law firms. They were an all virtual business and they wanted to understand how to use social media in their business. So they hired me to help them figure that out. And they were an all virtual business. So I learned how to set up company culture, systems and processes, and really create a coming together before Zoom, before Google Docs, before all these wonderful tools that we now have. And then I started to look for human beings to bring into the world of Company B who I could trust to work on their own to deliver results. One of the things back then that I love, I love the story. I had read an article in a woman's magazine about working from home, uh, probably in maybe 2000, say. And in that article, the woman said that every day, in order to work from home, she took a shower, got dressed, put on makeup, and set office hours. She didn't do laundry. She, didn't go grocery shopping. She didn't do anything other than work throughout the day. And when I set up my business, that's how I set up my life. I'm like, I have to treat this like a real job and talk to my employees um, about doing the same thing. And that was really, really good discipline. Back when it wasn't so normal to be running a business out of your home and having people working for you all around the country.
I think that's great. I do the same thing, by the way, and it was just a natural function. And I think also when I was in corporate my last couple years, I worked at home on Mondays and Fridays. And so it was just natural for me to come to my office dressed, expected to work, and I carried that same culture through. But I haven't brought that culture through to people I've hired. And I've noticed it's like, well, where are you right now?
Yes.
And I think it's such a great discipline. Yeah.
Yeah, in this, everything got flipped during COVID, and lots of people who said, "Oh, I could never work from home," had to
Mhm.
learn the discipline and learn how to adjust. So I feel like we were a little bit ahead of the game. And one of the keys was building figuring out what that culture is. So, what is your onboarding going to look like? Do you have offsites? How do you bring your team and get them excited about brainstorms when you're all so far flung?
Mhm.
And all of those wonderful pieces of what it's like to work together, um, I set processes in place to create those really great moments for the people on the Company B team.
Wow, I love that. It was really prescient, really. So COVID didn't rock your world quite as badly as it rocked the world of some other agencies, I'm sure.
No, it definitely didn't. But of course, I had a lot of clients who were out in the world who pulled back on budgets. So there
Mhm.
was, COVID rocked my world in the way that it rocked many, many people's world, which is what are we going to do now? And how are we going to tell stories? And I had one client whose business was largely based on in-person conferences, for example. So the question was, how are we going to shift what they're talking about and what they're doing? And we actually did for that particular client. It was a professional association we that dealt with workplace issues. We dialed into our thought leadership program for the CEO. And we said, okay, you need to be talking about this shakeup that the world is happening now. And you have trade publications that you can speak to, you have your own audiences that you can speak to. And then you have the top tier media that's also hungry for some insights and inspiration. So we created a program. And so instead of promoting conferences, we used him as our mouthpiece to speak to any number of workplace issues, leadership issues, how hourly wage workers are going to be paid issues, uh, how to deal with cultural issues when your workforce is now shoved free from home. And what we wound up doing was doing this every week for I don't know, say about 4 months, right at the start of COVID. And after 4 months, we were getting calls from the Wall Street Journal and CNBC because we had created an authority who was had data to share because we had them share data and had a real point of view, a contrary point of view on what was happening in the world. So that was one way that we shifted how we did work during COVID.
Yeah. And I can't wait to dive into that storytelling aspect with you. But before we do, I want to hear some of the rocky points that you went through with Company B and how did you get through those? Because, entrepreneurship is never a straight line up, right? So, what were some of the challenges you faced in the last 15 years and how have you handled them?
Well, there's this old adage that I think all of us in marketing and consulting have heard is that the minute you get a new client is the minute you start losing them. And so being mindful of the fact that client acquisition takes a tremendous amount of time, and retention is the best way to spend your time was a lesson that came to me hard in the first few years of my business. So I would get these incredible clients, we do amazing work for them, and I would joke that we would PR ourselves out of a job where we'd get these amazing clients, we carry them through acquisition, which happened a number of times, which is a number of times over the years. Then they would hire Edelman because they'd be, hired by a big company. So I think that the client churn is something that I knew intrinsically, but hadn't really prepared for. And over the years, we have developed new products and services to offer to our existing client base, so that they have reasons to keep engaging. That's helpful, and also to really understand and listen to what clients' needs are, because increasingly over the past 15 years since I started my business, PR tends to be an unmeasurable thing. At least that's sort of the common wisdom. Um, Really trying to create a reason and a way for clients to see their return on investment for the work that we're doing. That was also something that at the beginning, I didn't really have a system in place to help clients understand the value of our services from the beginning.
I think that is golden advice, and I hope people are taking note. The moment you close a client, you're losing them. So client retention. And also I've talked about client lifetime value. I think in 2025, as we move into this new year, I think retaining the clients that you have is, number one on the list. And I love that you created a way to measure impact, and that's super important. Let's talk about what you're doing right now. Before we hit record, you said you're traveling to Barcelona, to Bangkok. You're doing these storytelling clinics for executives. I'm super excited about that because the way that social media has exploded, if you're not a good storyteller, and even if you're a speaker, so business owners are natural thought leaders, speakers, storytellers. You have to be good at telling stories in order to stop the scroll on social. What are some of the aspects of storytelling? Well, first of all, what made you gravitate toward that? And then what are some of the mistakes people make that have them losing their audience before they even start speaking?
Okay, so I mean, I love stories. I grew up as a very shy child and immersed myself in books, and really believed in the power of stories to transport us and to take us to new places. Never in a million years did I think that I would become a professional storyteller. I thought that that was a skill that other people had, and that could not be learned. But I was wrong. I learned that you actually once you understand how stories work, and you understand why stories work, anyone could be a storyteller because of course we all are. Some people tell stories that that don't lead anywhere, and so we're disappointed, and you wish that they could be a little bit better and you'd be more engaged with them. But you can learn how to land your stories. for sure.
What's a tip that you can share with us on, without giving away your secret sauce, what is a tip that you can share with our listeners about how to become better at telling stories?
Well, I think you have to understand that stories aren't these big, highfalutin things that have long and winding roads. I mean, of course they can, but stories can be a tip. Stories can be people come to stories for little gossip. So if you can give them a little gossip, um, and they're looking for knowledge, and stories are a means to conferring authority and relevance. So if you think about how am I relevant to the people who I'm speaking to, and why do I have the authority, or how do I have the authority to tell this story? That's a pretty good place to start.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, and it's always what I notice, and LinkedIn is my primary social outlet. I just can't manage more than one. And but I am on Instagram, and my social media manager said, do a reel, Deb. We want to see you like drinking coffee, cooking in the kitchen, walking your dog. And I said, okay to her to that, it's a visual story. And then everything in my body was like, no, I really don't want to do that. And instead, I created a video and I posted on LinkedIn on why I didn't want to dress up and take a reel and give you this kind of contrived BTS behind the scenes of my life, because my life is private. I really enjoy those moments. I was born in a generation that didn't have cell phones, right? So we're not selfie natives, right? So we're not selfie natives. And I like private moments with my family without feeling the pressure to record them. And that one video opened up such a huge conversation around that concept. And I probably got more impressions, more comments, more conversation, more connection out of telling that story than I would have doing a behind the scenes video.
So I'll tell you why. The behind the scenes video, you drinking coffee and walking your dog, that is ordinary and there's no conflict unless you trip, unless your coffee machine explodes or something happens that messes up your day and spins you in another direction. That story is intrinsically not interesting. But what is interesting about the video that you showed on LinkedIn is you set up a relatable conflict. You revealed a little bit about yourself authentically to enable people to connect with you. You made this. Had a distinct point of view, right? I'm not going to share my private life because I'm a private person. What about you? So it has all of the elements of a good story, and it's relatable and shareable. So I'm not surprised that it did well, because if you just break down the story, that's it. That's a classic story.
And to get press, right, to get visibility in the market, whether it's visibility in your channel with your ideal clients, whether you want visibility in the media, what are people doing wrong that's not getting them the eyeballs or the attention or the opportunities to showcase their expertise on a bigger platform?
So there are many things that go into making mistakes. The first thing is thinking that your features or your method is the news. It's not the news. How you fit into the news is the news. So I have so many clients come to me and say, we have the greatest platform on earth for doing X, and we want everybody to know about it because we have client Z using our platform to do X. Well, that's kind of not interesting to anyone. And it's also not newsworthy. What is newsworthy is what using the platform, how someone uses the platform to achieve X, what happens as a result? And how does that change that has happened fit into a conversation that's already happening in the news? Is something that people are interested in learning more about. So the biggest mistake is assuming that what you're doing is newsworthy, because chances are it's not. It might be good, it might be relevant, it might be valuable to your clients, but no one is going to care unless you package it up into a story that makes it relatable, that makes it believable, and that gives the audience something to hang on to. The media today is so fragmented, and journalists are so busy managing their daily work and all the pitches that they're getting, that you have to make it really easy for them to see how what you're doing fits into what they're reporting on. So the biggest mistake people make is not thinking about their story in terms of a brochure, but a news story or of any type, whether it's about leadership, is a different animal altogether, has a different purpose.
Yeah, and it's also aligned with being relevant as a business owner and being relevant to your audience, right? You don't want to be tone deaf to what's going on in the outside world, and you don't want it to be all about me, 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 and I'm the greatest thing. And now we're in this time, at least in the coaching, consulting, and services space, where it's really crowded. It's really
Yes.
crowded where, you and I've been in business 11 years, you've been in business 15 years, it wasn't so noisy. It was a lot easier to get recognized. It was a lot easier to get people to sign up for your webinars or workshops or whatever it was that you were offering. And now it's like, this is just the cost of entry into entrepreneurship, is being able to tell a good story, and being relevant. So you have to, and you mentioned COVID, right? So during the time, my leadership and executive coaching clients, I was like, well, let's look at what's happening. Corporate culture is eroding. Leaders don't know how to lead teams in a hybrid or a remote workforce. So that's your opportunity to be more relevant. And I think in order to survive as an entrepreneur, as a business owner over decades, you have to always be tuning in to what's going on in the channel. What is the narrative? How can I tune in? And now we're in this crazy space of not knowing what this new administration life is going to be like. There's a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of doubt in the current environment. But the other thing and I don't know what to say about that, because I think we're just going to have to live through it and let events unfold and decide how we want to respond as they're happening. But in the space that I'm in, we've seen more and more women over the last 3 years or so leave corporate to say, screw this. I'm not playing by these rules anymore. I want success on my terms, and have grossly underestimated what it takes in order to create that visibility. And so the great breakup is turned into the great boomerang,
So
so
they're going back to work.
yeah, the going back to work. And so, that's an example of being relevant. If I were to pitch a story, I'm testing this with you, Bonnie. If I were to pitch a story on, we're in the great boomerang, how many entrepreneurs left corporate after COVID and are now going back trying to get jobs, and many of those are over 50 and having a hard time.
Right. Yeah, well, I think if you had statistics to back that up, I think that's a powerful story. And it would be of interest to, again, there's a subset of journalists, workplace journalists in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, on the Today Show, for example. You have your whole retinue of journalists who work for LinkedIn. So these are stories that you could tell to those audiences. You have to back them up with you, Deb. If you were to tell that story, you could have one member of your community tell her story about her boomeranging, some statistics, some big statistics, and then you sort of seeing what the landscape is based on the community that you've built. And I think that is a good story. And there have been so many stories about women over 50 and men too, who are having trouble right now. So I think that, again, if the it sets up a relatable conflict, right?
Yeah.
This desire for self-expression and freedom and the ability to do just what it is you love to do, but it's hard and you have to make some changes and compromises. And sadly, that could be going back into the office. And my guess is that there's both a good side and a bad side. Nate. Entrepreneurship is hard.
Mhm.
And you have to have a kind of a thick skin. Imagine if you were an opera singer and you had a shrinking world of the opera. This, in fact, my daughter's an opera singer. And there's a shrinking world of opera companies around, literally on the planet, bigger, and you are auditioning over and over and over again, and not getting the roles that you want to get. So then you have to make a decision.
Mhm.
Am I going to pivot and do something a little bit so I don't get rejected over and over again? Or am I going to sort of stick with my guns? And luckily, women who are at this pivot point where they're finding that being in business on their own is hard, they don't have to make both choices. They can go and look for a job and then do their side hustle. And when I worked full time, I uh, made a deal with not the New York Times because they wouldn't allow me to do it, with some of the other publications that I wrote for, and they said to continue to write stories, for example, while I was working at a PR agency, as long as there was no conflict, because there's such strict rules about that. So we would vet the topics, vet the sources, and then I would get approval, and then I'd be able to write stories. So you can continue to pursue your dream while working full time, I think. You
Absolutely.
need to.
I call that let your company be your very first investor in your new endeavor, you know?
Oh yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's so true. When I left the PR agency, one of my first clients was a spokesperson who I'd worked with on eBay, who wanted to level up his business. So we worked together to get him the attention that he deserved in the media set that was right for him. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm curious, what door opened for you, or what light bulb moment you had that said, "Oh, the storytelling is the key, and there's demand there, and I want to take this storytelling framework or methodology and share it with more thought leaders." What was that moment like? And tell us about that piece of your business.
So, I always had a dream that when I retired, I was going to teach um, at in a small teach at a university in a small southern town. I didn't know what I was going to teach, but that was sort of my retirement plan. But um, in 2019, I received a call from a colleague who was working at a university in Barcelona teaching digital marketing. And she said, "Hey, Bonnie, do you want to come to Barcelona and teach PR?" And I thought, well, I'm not ready to retire. Barcelona isn't a small town in the South. But this sounds like a pretty good opportunity. So I developed a curriculum called Storytelling for Brands in the Digital Age, testing out, and began to teach my class to graduate students from around the world who come to Harbor Space University to get a master's degree in digital marketing. And and the university then expanded to Bangkok. So I went to Bangkok. And when I'm in these cities, I'm like, well, there's this whole community of really wonderful business people, and I'm here for a month. I may as well meet them. So I started to reach out and I now have wonderful networks in both cities, and then offered. I know, Deb, you're probably going to kill me, but I offered sort of a half-hour storytelling workshops in person for free. And then that turned into, hey, can you come and come to my company and train my executives in storytelling. So I got to test the waters in a university setting. I already knew it was successful because of the work that I was seeing out of my students. And then I just started marketing it internationally, and now here in the US as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Like, I want to take one of your workshops. You know, to let me know. Let me know the next opportunity. I really want to do it. And I don't have a judgment about doing stuff for free. I mean, we do a lot of free workshops too to introduce people to our work. I think, there comes a point where we want to pull back a little bit on that and create a container of people, a special network that we deliver that to. But it's always good. People always say that, Deb, you're gonna kill me. I've underpriced my services, or I've given
Yeah.
something away for free. But I think it's important to be able to showcase to people what you're capable of in a way that is a low cost or no cost investment, and then, let them take it to the next level. So I love that story.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great. And I highly recommend um developing a curriculum, on just because it's a really good tool to have, even if you're not teaching at a university. It's a tremendous task. It's 45 hours of class time. So it's a lot of thought and care goes into how to create that curriculum.
Yeah. And if are these sessions open to the public?
So at the university, no, but
Your executive sessions.
my executive sessions, yes, yes, we sometimes I work with local partners who will market them to the public. I'll do them at co-working spaces, and sometimes they're private.
Oh, okay. Well, I have an invitation for you coming. Uh, Before we go, Bonnie, you mentioned before we hit record about how to think in stories rather than brand benefits. And would love to, and every journalist I've ever met is the best storyteller. And I feel like there's this little secret formula that's going on behind the scenes in your brain. So what can you share with us about how to think in terms of telling stories?
Well, I think you have to think about the relatable conflict. I know that, in marketing speak, it's called pain point. What is the pain point that your customer is feeling? But what is in every story has a relatable conflict. And every story shows how that conflict is overcome. Um, and you can show how to overcome that conflict through the people in your company who help solve the problem. And the best stories have twists and turns. So it's not always a straight line to, oh, he had this problem, we did X, problem solved. There usually are some enemies, obstacles, puzzles, or traps that that your that your protagonist is going to face along the way. And when you're setting up a story, it's good to think, what is the conflict? What are the enemies, obstacles, puzzles, and traps? So you can define the conflict in that way. And how am I going to solve the conflict? And in the PR world, it usually involves who are the main characters in the story, right? It involves people. And then how do we prove that the people are going to take us on this journey? We're going to be satisfied at the end. The stories that we tell have to be authentic. They have to be relatable. Um, Maybe there's a little fact and stat in there to bring us along the way. And of course, a story has to have a satisfying ending. Nobody wants the story to lay like a wet noodle on the floor. So the ending to the story has to be something that you thought, oh my God, of course this is the ending to the story. It makes perfect sense. And yet you are still surprised.
I love that. That was a great, great formula. I hope everyone took notes on that one. And Bonnie, what's next for you? That was so valuable. What's next for you? What's on the horizon?
What is on the horizon? Well, 2025 promises to be a whirlwind year where I'm going to be traveling around the globe, teaching both my classes and my storytelling workshops. So I'm very, very excited about that. And I'll be posting a lot more about my journeys on LinkedIn, as I tend to do. And I'm really looking forward to a positive year, despite this chaotic world in which we have found ourselves placed.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm right there with you. And I am so grateful that you said yes to this podcast. I felt like we just had a very public catch up.
Yes, I know. And I too have to call Julie Catino and tell her that we spoke.
Yeah, we just have a little mini reunion
Love that.
in the
Yeah.
city. That would be so much fun.
Wonderful.
Yeah, love that. Thank you so much, Bonnie Rothman. We're going to share your links to how to follow you and your social handles and all of that, and any upcoming workshops that you're aware of that are open to others registering. And be a good storyteller, my friend. I love the conflict, the idea of the conflict. Look at the conflict as opposed to the challenge and pain points. Follow Bonnie's formula and you'll naturally just become a better storyteller. And good storytelling, it's just the price of admission in this current marketplace where without being a good storyteller, no one's going to pay attention to your content and you'll be overlooked and you'll be wondering why other people are getting likes and comments and they're being invited to speak and they're getting press and all the things. And so storytelling is your key to open that door. So thanks so much, everyone, for listening. We appreciate you. If you like this episode, please leave us a review and subscribe to the show. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Bonnie.
Thanks, Dad.